Welcome to Infinite Library, where every story is a new mystery waiting to be solved. Grab a coffee, stay curious, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. A faint rhythmic pulse rippled through the void, an ancient ethereal tone that had no place in the cacophony of galactic chatter. It was faint at first, just an anomaly picked up by a decaying communications relay on the edge of the outer rim. But as it persisted, growing clearer with each transmission, it drew whispers of something extraordinary. The signal was unmistakably ancient and layered with a Jedi dialect so old it hadn't been spoken in generations. On Vraxa 4, a struggling settlement that clung to the fringes of civilization, the signal became a quiet obsession. Engineers worked tirelessly to decipher it, their crude instruments barely capable of peeling back the centuries embedded in its resonance. It wasn't long before rumors spread, whispers of a treasure, a secret, or perhaps a warning. Whatever, the signal promised. It had awakened a hunger in those who listened. Eryndor Kael was not a man who chased rumors. Once a Jedi Knight, now a fugitive, he had spent years erasing himself from the galaxy's memory. But this signal, it called to him. It wasn't just the words, fragmented and distorted, but the way the Force seemed to hum around it, like a taut string ready to snap. Redemption was not something Eryndor believed in anymore, but the chance to silence the haunting echoes of his failures compelled him to act. He boarded the Dagger's Grace, his weathered starship, and set course for Vraxa 4. At the same time, Nia Vor, a young engineer barely out of her apprenticeship, stared at the signal with wide, feverish eyes. She'd spent her entire life scavenging and reverse engineering tech from the forgotten corners of the galaxy, dreaming of one day unearthing something that would make her name echo in history. This signal was her chance. She bartered her meager savings for passage on a freighter heading toward the rumored source, clutching her tools and calculations like a talisman. Then there was Karin Draven, a Mandalorian bounty hunter whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded her. Karin cared little for ancient signals or Jedi dialects, but the price on a bounty tied to this mystery had grown staggeringly high. Mercenaries whispered about the job in hushed tones, speculating what kind of prey could warrant such riches. To Karin, the details didn't matter. A job was a job, and if it meant plunging into the unknown, so be it. Their paths converged on the edges of the galaxy, aboard the Dagger's Grace. A tenuous alliance formed, held together by necessity and distrust. Each of them had their reasons, but they shared a single destination, the source of the signal. As they approached the uncharted system, the journey grew perilous. A dense graveyard of derelict starships encased the region, their shattered hulls, a testament to battles fought long before anyone could remember. The Dagger's Grace weaved through the wreckage with calculated precision, but even Eryndor's steady hand could not shield them entirely. A sudden collision with a fragment of a High Republic dreadnought's hull sent the ship spiraling. Alarms, blaring. "Shields failing," Nia shouted from the co-pilot's chair, her fingers flying over the console in an effort to reroute power. "Hold it together," Karin growled, strapping herself into a seat with a calm that belied the chaos around her. "If this tin can falls apart, I'm taking the cost out of both your hides." "Not helping," Eryndor muttered, gritting his teeth as he wrestled the controls. The Dagger's Grace groaned in protest, but he managed to stabilize its trajectory. Just as the looming silhouette of an enormous station came into view, it was unlike anything they had expected. The station's design defied classification, blending Republic architecture with alien influences that none of them could place. It orbited a dark star, its surface rippling with faint, unnatural light. The signal's frequency grew deafeningly, clear as they approached, filling the cockpit with an almost hypnotic resonance. "That's it," Nia whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "That's where it's coming from." Eryndor didn't respond. His gaze was locked on the station, a chill running down his spine. The Force swirled around the place, heavy and foreboding. It wasn't just a signal, it was a lure, and they had taken the bait. The Dagger's Grace docked with the station, its systems barely holding together after the treacherous approach. As the airlock hissed open, the three of them stepped into the unknown. The station's interior was eerily silent. its corridors dimly lit by flickering lights that pulsed in time with the signal. "Keep your guard up," Karen said, her blaster drawn. Nia clutched a datapad, her wide eyes darting around as she muttered calculations under her breath. Eryndor led the way, his lightsaber unlit but ready in his hand. The Force whispered warnings he couldn't yet decipher. Deeper into the station, the signal grew louder, resonating through their bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was alive. "It's not just a station," Eryndor said, his voice distant. "It's a monument or a tomb." He paused, running his hand along the wall. The carvings were intricate, depicting scenes of a galaxy teetering on the brink of collapse. They weren't just alien, they were prophetic. "What's this?" Nia's voice drew their attention to a massive circular door at the end of the corridor. Its surface was etched with concentric rings of symbols, glowing faintly. The signal was, deafening now, vibrating through the air. "It's a seal," Eryndor said, stepping closer. The Force surged around it, a turbulent mix of power and warning. "And it's locked." "Locked with what?" Karen asked, eyeing the door warily. Eryndor didn't answer immediately. He could feel it, an ancient mechanism layered with protections meant to deter anyone from opening it. It wasn't just mechanical. It was alive, resonating with the Force itself. Nia approached the door, her engineer's curiosity outweighing her fear. "There's a pattern here," she said, tracing the symbols with her finger. "I've seen something like this before on a derelict from the Clone Wars. It's a key, but it's missing pieces." "Don't touch it," Eryndor warned, his tone sharper than he intended. Nia froze, startled, and stepped back. Karen rolled her eyes. "Great. So we came all this way for a locked door? What's behind it, anyway?" "That's what I'd like to know," Eryndor replied, but his voice was heavy with doubt. The seal felt like a barrier between two worlds, and whatever lay on the other side wasn't meant to be disturbed. As they deliberated, the station groaned. The lights dimmed, and a low, guttural hum reverberated through the walls. The signal shifted, no longer a rhythmic pulse, but an erratic, desperate cry. "That's new," Karen said, her voice tense. "We're not alone here." Eryndor reached out with the Force, searching for the source of the disturbance. It was faint at first, like a ripple in a still pond, but it grew stronger, a presence, ancient and aware, moving through the station. "Something's coming," he said, igniting his lightsaber. The blue blade cast an eerie glow over the corridor, its hum a stark contrast to the alien silence around them. Before anyone could respond, the darkness ahead shifted. Shapes emerged, humanoid but wrong, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were clad in remnants of ancient armor, their hollow eyes glowing with faint, sickly light. "Those aren't alive," Nia whispered, her voice trembling. "Doesn't matter," Karen said, raising her blaster. "They can still die." The figures advanced, their steps synchronized with the erratic signal. Eryndor stepped forward, his lightsaber arcing in a defensive stance. Karen opened fire, her shots precise, but the figures didn't falter. Eryndor moved like a whirlwind, his blade carving through the first wave of attackers. Sparks flew as metal met plasma, but even as the figures fell, more emerged from the shadows. "We can't fight them all," Nia shouted, ducking behind a console as stray blaster bolts ricocheted around her. "Then run!" Karen barked, firing. Another volley before retreating toward the seal. Eryndor followed, his lightsaber holding the advancing horde at bay. The seal pulsed with energy as they approached, as if responding to their desperation. Nia scrambled to the console beside the door, her hands flying over the controls. "I think I can override it, but it'll take time." "We don't have time," Karen snapped, her blaster overheating from continuous fire. "Then buy me some," Nia retorted, her voice rising with panic. Eryndor turned, planting himself between the attackers and the seal. The Force surged through him, amplifying his movements as he deflected blaster fire and struck down the relentless figures. The station groaned again, louder this time, as if it were alive and angry. The air grew heavier, charged with an energy that made every breath a struggle. "Hurry!" Eryndor shouted, his voice strained. Nia worked frantically, her fingers moving faster than thought. The symbols on the door began to align, their glow intensifying. The seal trembled, the energy around it reaching a crescendo. With a final keystroke, the door shuddered and began to open. A blinding light spilled through the widening gap, and the attackers froze, their movements halting mid-step. Eryndor stumbled back, his lightsaber still raised. The figures receded into the shadows, their forms dissolving as the seal's light consumed them. As the door fully opened, the signal ceased, replaced by an ominous silence. Beyond the threshold lay a vast chamber, its walls inscribed with more of the alien symbols. At its center stood a pedestal, holding a device that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow. "What is that?" Karen asked, her voice filled with equal parts awe and dread. Eryndor stepped forward, the force pulling him toward the device. "The answer," he said, though his tone carried the weight of uncertainty. Behind them, the station's groans grew louder, the air crackling with tension. Whatever they had unleashed, it was only the beginning. The air inside the chamber was electric, humming with the latent energy of the device at its center. Eryndor approached cautiously, each step weighted by the gravity of what lay before them. The pedestal was crafted from a material that seemed to shift under the light, neither stone nor metal, but something wholly alien. The symbols carved into its surface shimmered faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the device above it. "This is it," Nia murmured, her voice hushed in reverence. She hovered near Eryndor, her gaze locked on the object. It was a small crystalline structure suspended mid-air, rotating slowly. Energy flowed through it in strands of light, like veins carrying blood. "What's it supposed to do?" Karen asked, keeping her distance. She scanned the chamber with her blaster drawn, her instincts screaming that they were far from safe. Eryndor extended a hand, letting the force guide him. As his fingers neared the crystal, a surge of energy coursed through him. His vision blurred, overtaken by a torrent of images, planets crumbling into dust, fleets engulfed in fire, and beings consumed by an endless, all-encompassing darkness. Amid the chaos, he saw humanity, a single defiant spark refusing to be extinguished. He staggered back, clutching his head. "It's not a weapon," he said, his voice strained. "It's a warning." "A warning about what?" Nia asked, her expression torn between curiosity and fear. Eryndor steadied himself, the visions still fresh in his mind. "About the darkness. About what happens if we don't stop it." Karen frowned, stepping closer to the pedestal but keeping her weapon ready. "So it's a prophecy or some kind of doomsday manual." "It's more than that," Nia interjected, her eyes scanning the symbols on the pedestal. "These markings, they're instructions. Whoever built this wanted us to find it. They left this here for a reason." Eryndor nodded, his gaze fixed on the crystal. "It's connected to the Force, I can feel it, but it's not just warning us, it's showing us the way forward, a path to fight back." Before they could delve further, the station shuddered violently. A deep, resonant roar echoed through the chamber, shaking the walls and knocking them off balance. "What now?" Karen growled, bracing herself against a column. The room's energy shifted, growing colder and more oppressive. From the shadows, beyond the chamber's edges, the same humanoid figures from before began to emerge, their hollow eyes burning brighter. Only now, they were joined by something larger, an enormous, shifting mass that seemed to absorb the light around it. "That's not just a guardian," Nia whispered, her voice trembling. "That's the darkness." Eryndor ignited his lightsaber, its blue glow cutting through the encroaching shadows. "We need to get the crystal out of here. It's the only chance we have. You want to carry that thing while fighting off whatever this is," Karen snapped, opening fire on the advancing figures. Her shots hit their marks, but the creatures reformed almost instantly, as though the very shadows gave them life. Eryndor grabbed the crystal, and the moment his hand closed around it, the chamber erupted in a blinding light. The figures recoiled, their forms flickering like distorted holograms. The larger mass hesitated, its shape writhing as though struggling against an unseen force. "Move!" Eryndor shouted, tucking the crystal into his satchel and sprinting toward the chamber's exit. The others followed, their steps frantic as the station seemed to come alive, its walls shifting and groaning. The corridors they had traversed earlier now twisted into an impossible maze, leading them deeper instead of toward the ship. "We're trapped," Nia said, panic creeping into her voice as she scanned her datapad for any semblance of a map. "No, we're not," Eryndor said, his tone resolute. He closed his eyes, reaching out with the Force. The visions returned, guiding him. "This way." They ran through the maze, pursued by the relentless shadows. Karin laid down suppressive fire, her precision keeping the creatures at bay, though it was clear they wouldn't hold for long. Ahead, a faint light appeared. A docking bay, its exit barely visible through the swirling mass of shadows. Their ship was within sight, but the darkness loomed, blocking the path. "Get to the ship," Eryndor ordered, turning to face the pursuing horde. "What? You're not seriously staying behind?" Karin yelled, but Eryndor didn't respond. "This isn't up for debate," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Go. Now." Nia hesitated, her eyes wide with fear, but Karin grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the ship. "We're not dying here," she growled. As they sprinted for the docking bay, Eryndor planted himself in the corridor, his lightsaber blazing. He closed his eyes, channeling the Force with every ounce of his strength. The crystal pulsed in rhythm with his resolve, amplifying his power. The shadows surged forward, but Eryndor stood his ground, a beacon of light against the encroaching void. Behind him, the ship roared to life, its engines shaking the bay. With a final surge of energy, Eryndor unleashed a wave of Force energy, pushing back the darkness long enough for the ship to escape. As the boarding ramp sealed and the ship soared into the void, Karin and Nia stared out the viewport, their expressions a mix of grief and determination. "He made his choice," Karin said quietly, gripping the controls. Nia clutched the crystal, its faint glow a reminder of the sacrifice made. "Then we have to make it count." As the station disappeared into the darkness behind them, the weight of their mission settled. The galaxy was counting on them, and failure was not an option. The void of hyperspace stretched endlessly before them, its swirling blue and white currents a stark contrast to the turmoil in their hearts. Karin piloted the ship in grim silence, her hands steady on the controls despite the weight of what they had left behind. Nia sat in the co-pilot's chair, her gaze fixed on the crystal now resting on the console. Its soft glow pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, reminding them of the impossible task ahead. "We need to figure out what this thing really is," Nia said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor in her hands as she reached for the crystal. "Figure it out fast," Karin replied, not looking away from the viewport. "That thing back there, it's not going to stop just because we left." Nia nodded, her fingers tracing the symbols etched into the crystal. They seemed to shift under her touch, rearranging themselves into patterns that made no sense, and yet felt oddly familiar. "It's like it's alive," she murmured, more to herself than to Karin. Before Karin could respond, the ship's console beeped sharply. A proximity alert flashed on the screen, indicating multiple vessels dropping out of hyperspace directly in their path. "Company," Karin muttered, flipping switches to bring the ship's shields online. Through the viewport, a cluster of ships emerged from the swirling void. They were sleek and alien, their surfaces shimmering like liquid metal. No identifying marks or insignias adorned their hulls, but their intent was clear as they moved to surround the lone freighter. "Great," Karin growled, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "More friends." The comm system crackled to life, a cold metallic voice cutting through the tension. "Surrender the artifact and you will be spared." "Not exactly a warm introduction," Karin muttered, her hand hovering over the weapons controls. Nia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at the ships. "We can't let them have it. Whatever this crystal is, it's too important." Karin's jaw tightened. "I wasn't planning on giving it to them." The alien ships opened fire, their weapons striking the freighter's shields with precision. The entire vessel shuddered under the barrage, and warning lights flared across the console. "Hold on!" Karin shouted, throwing the ship into a tree. Evasive maneuver. The freighter banked sharply, narrowly avoiding another volley. In the chaos, Nia's mind raced. The crystal's glow had intensified, its pulsing now rapid and erratic. She closed her eyes, focusing on it, trying to feel what Eryndor had felt in the chamber. Images flashed in her mind, maps, pathways through the stars, and a single point of light that seemed to call to her. Karen, I know where we need to go, Nia exclaimed, snapping her eyes open. Fantastic. Can it wait until we're not being shot at? Karen retorted, jerking the controls to avoid another salvo. No, it can't, Nia insisted, her voice firm. This crystal, it's guiding us. There's a system nearby, a place where we can hide and figure out our next move. Karen hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Fine. Tell me where. Nia fed the coordinates into the Navi computer, and Karen adjusted their course, weaving through the alien ships with skill that spoke to her years as a pilot. The freighter's engines roared as they jumped to hyperspace, leaving their pursuers behind. As the ship settled into the safety of the hyperspace corridor, Karen slumped back in her seat, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. All right, kid. You've got us a destination. Now tell me it's not just a wild guess. It's not, Nia said, clutching the crystal tightly. It showed me. This system, it's where we'll find the answers. It's where we'll figure out how to fight the darkness. Karen studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. Then let's hope you're right, because if you're not, we're running out of places to hide. The freighter continued its journey through hyperspace, carrying its unlikely crew toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the galaxy churned with forces they barely understood. Ahead, the crystal's faint glow served as a beacon, a fragile promise of hope in a galaxy teetering on the edge of despair. The ship dropped out of hyperspace into a system cloaked in twilight. The star at its center was dim, a sullen red ember that cast the surrounding planets in a perpetual dusk. The freighter drifted toward the system's innermost world, a barren rock scarred by massive fissures that glowed faintly with geothermal light. Karen's fingers hovered over the controls as she guided the ship into orbit, her eyes scanning the bleak terrain below. This is it, Nia said, her voice soft but certain. She held the crystal tightly, its glow matching the faint pulses of light emanating from the planet's surface. This is where it wants us to go, Karen frowned. A dead world in the middle of nowhere. Perfect spot for answers. Nia ignored the sarcasm, her gaze fixed on the planet. There's something down there, I can feel it. Let's hope it's not more of the same thing that tried to kill us back there, Karen muttered. She adjusted the ship's trajectory and initiated a descent. As they broke through the thin atmosphere, the ship's scanners pinged faintly, picking up signs of an artificial structure hidden among the craggy landscape. The freighter landed in a shallow basin surrounded by jagged cliffs. Karen powered down the engines and leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. All right, kid, what now? Nia closed her eyes, focusing on the crystal. Its light grew steadier, its warmth spreading through her fingers. We go to the source. The crystal is leading us. Karen sighed and grabbed her blaster from the console. Lead the way, then. But if this thing gets us killed, I'm holding you personally responsible. They stepped out into the planet's thin, chill air, their boots crunching on the cracked, desolate ground. The faint glow of the fissures illuminated their path, leading them toward a structure partially buried beneath the rubble. It was ancient, its walls blackened and pitted as if by extreme heat. Strange symbols adorned the exterior, eerily similar to those etched into the crystal. As they approached, the ground trembled faintly beneath their feet. Karen's hand went to her blaster, her eyes scanning their surroundings. This place doesn't feel right. It's not supposed to, Nia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She placed a hand on the structure's surface, and the crystal in her other hand flared to life. A low hum resonated through the air, and the symbols on the wall began to glow, matching the light of the crystal. The structure groaned, ancient mechanisms grinding to life after untold millennia. A section of the wall slid aside, revealing a narrow passageway that descended into darkness. Without hesitation, Nia stepped forward, the crystal illuminating the path ahead. Karen hesitated at the threshold, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But something in Nia's expression, a mix of determination and something almost reverent, compelled her to follow. The passage spiraled downward, the air growing heavier with each step. The walls were lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe in the crystal's light. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that the carvings were watching them, their gaze cold and unyielding. They emerged into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center stood a towering obelisk of black stone, its surface rippling like liquid. The crystal in Nia's hand pulsed wildly, its light casting strange, angular shadows across the room. "This is it," Nia said, her voice trembling. "This is what we came for." Before Karin could respond, the obelisk surged with light, and a voice echoed through the chamber, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly into her mind. "Who dares to wake us?" Karin drew her blaster instinctively, but Nia stepped forward, holding the crystal aloft. "We seek the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the terror etched on her face. "We seek to understand." The obelisk's light dimmed slightly, its surface swirling with images too fleeting to comprehend. The voice returned, colder this time. "Truth comes at a price." The ground beneath them shook, and the air grew electric with tension. Karin gritted her teeth, her grip tightening on her weapon. "Nia, I really hope you know what you're doing." Nia didn't answer. She stepped closer to the obelisk, her gaze unwavering. "We're ready to—" The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, the obelisk began to open, revealing a churning void within. From its depths came a faint, haunting melody, a sound that was both beautiful and terrifying. Karin's heart pounded as she watched, unsure whether they had found salvation or sealed their doom. From the void within the obelisk, the melody swelled, resonating through the chamber like a tidal wave of sound and emotion. Karin staggered back, her blaster trembling in her hands. It wasn't just a melody, it was a voice, layered and infinite, speaking in tones that bypassed her understanding and went straight to her soul. It felt ancient, boundless and terrifyingly aware. Nia stood transfixed, her eyes wide and unblinking as the crystal in her hand pulsed in perfect harmony with the sound. Her lips moved, but her voice was lost in the overwhelming cascade of the obelisk's song, and then as suddenly as it began, the sound ceased, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. The void shimmered, and a figure began to emerge, ethereal, humanoid, yet impossibly alien. It shifted and flickered, as if existing in dimensions that Karin's eyes weren't equipped to perceive. "You carry the shard," the figure intoned, its voice echoing in layers. It wasn't a question but a statement, absolute and undeniable. Its gaze, or what passed for a gaze, settled on Nia. "You have come seeking answers." Nia's voice was steady but hushed. "We seek the truth about the lost galaxy. The crystal brought us here. It guided us." The figure tilted its head, a gesture that seemed almost curious. "The crystal did not guide you. It warned you. Yet you came as all who are drawn to the siren call of forgotten power. Human, forever reaching, forever blind." Karin stepped forward, blaster raised. "If this is a trap, I swear—" The figure shifted its attention to her, and the weight of its gaze made her knees buckle. "You wield your weapon as if it holds meaning here. It does not. None of your tools or instincts will serve you in this place." Karin gritted her teeth, her pride bristling, but she lowered the weapon. "What are you then, some kind of ancient guardian?" The figure's form flickered, its edges blurring into the surrounding void. "I am what remains of those who once ruled this galaxy. I am the echo of their wisdom and their folly. The lost galaxy. It is not what you believe it to be. It is not lost. It is imprisoned." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Karin's eyes darted to Nia, who clutched the crystal tightly, her face pale. "Imprisoned?" Nia whispered. "Why? By whom?" The figure seemed to ripple, its form expanding and contracting as if reliving a memory. "There was a time when this galaxy was vibrant, teeming with life and potential. But we were arrogant. We sought to control that which cannot be controlled. We broke the fabric of reality, and the galaxy itself became an aberration. To protect the greater cosmos, we bound it, contained it. But the cost was steep. We became the jailers of our own creation." Karin took a shaky step forward. "And now? What's changed? Why call us here?" The figure's voice grew, colder. "The binding is failing. Cracks have formed. If the galaxy awakens, it will not stop with your kind. It will consume everything." Nia's grip on the crystal tightened. "Then what are we supposed to do?" You brought us here for a reason. You carry the shard of the Sentinel, a fragment of what once maintained the balance. It is both a key and a weapon. But beware, human. Keys can open doors, or lock them forever. The figure gestured toward the obelisk, and the void within it shifted, revealing fleeting glimpses of other worlds, chaotic, violent, and eerily familiar. Karen's breath caught as she recognized the silhouette of a human starship among the chaos. "What are we looking at?" Karen demanded. "Possibilities," the figure replied. "Futures that may come to pass should the shard's power be unleashed." Nia stepped closer, her voice trembling. "But we can stop it, can't we? That's why we're here. To fix this." The figure's form began to fade, its light dimming as the void within the obelisk grew darker. "That choice is not mine to make. It is yours. But know this, humans. Every choice carries a price, and your kind has always been willing to pay it." The obelisk shuddered, and the void began to collapse inward, pulling the figure with it. The crystal in Nia's hand flared brightly, and the carvings on the walls lit up, casting the chamber in a blinding radiance. As the light subsided, the obelisk stood silent and inert once more. Karen looked at Nia, her expression a mix of awe and dread. "What now?" Nia's gaze didn't waver, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We find the cracks, and we decide which doors to open.